You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 26th of December 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Tom Edwards. This Boxing Day, we're taking a look back at some of our biggest interviews from across Monocle Radio in the past 12 months. Coming up on today's programme, Oscar-winning director Steve McQueen discusses his film Blitz.
I wanted to bring the reality of the environment as well. As much as one was fighting the enemy, which was the Nazis, we were fighting ourselves again. Yeah, I mean, lots of things that were embedded within this narrative in sense of way of the actual narrative of the times that people lived in, which through colonialism and so forth.
Lebanese-born architect Lina Ghotmeh on the founding principle of her eponymously named practice.
I grew up in Beirut, and growing up in such a city, architecture meant a lot for me. It meant a possibility of healing, of bringing people together. I was drawn to that landscape that was in ruins and thinking, how can we build? What tool do I have as a human being to allow beauty to be brought back in a landscape?
Expressionist painter Maggi Hambling talks us through her artistic method.
I'm a great believer in the Chinese idea that you've got to be as eloquent where you don't make a mark as where you do make a mark.
And we hear from the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, Almar Latour, about the paper's future plans and its efforts to secure the release of reporter Evan Gershkovich.
We saw from the Wall Street Journal newsroom at a grassroots level, people being so passionate about fighting for their colleague. We saw it from Evan's family, who pushed so hard and really put themselves out there. But we also saw it from the wider news media community. I don't recall a moment where the entire industry came together and fought for one cause, in this case, the release of Evan.
All that ahead here on this special Boxing Day edition of The Briefing with me, Tom Edwards. We start the programme with Steve McQueen, who returned to cinemas this year with Blitz, a fresh look at a period that's imbued in the country's psyche. The film follows the journey of a young boy, George, played by Elliot Heffernan, whose mother, brought to the screen by Saoirse Ronan, sends him to safety in the countryside. Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco spoke with the director in London and asked Steve how he perceives the Blitz and its effect on the British nation.
My mum sent me away.
She did it to keep you safe.
Your son did not arrive at his destination. You're responsible for his safety. Why can't you tell me? Where's my boy?
Defiance against the Nazis. I think that was everyone's takeaway. Again, defiance against sort of tyranny in a way. You know, step up a lip, keep calm and carry on situation. You know, again, during my research, you sort of do some shallow digging and you find out it was slightly different. I mean, there's the front of what that is, but also there's the reality of actually what was happening.
That's precisely what I also like in the film, because, you know, this kind of stiff upper lip kind of attitude. But the UK, the situation was not very rosy as well. It was not everyone in it together. There was a lot of that. But it was also a difficult time. There were kind of racism. Society was not as rosy and united as some people make us think.
No, it wasn't. I mean, again, my picture, I wanted to bring the reality of the environment as well. As much as one was fighting the enemy, which was the Nazis, we were fighting ourselves again. Yeah, I mean, lots of things that were embedded within this narrative in sense of way of the actual narrative of the times that people lived in, which through colonialism and so forth.
But at the same time, you know, let's talk about something positive. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when Rita...
Oh, this is all positive.
Oh, yeah, this is all positive.
The truth is always positive.
Oh, yes, I agree with you. When Rita is dancing with her partner in a club, I mean, this is such a vivacious scene. That was beautiful and brought some color to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I mean, this is the reality of what was going on actually during the 30s, because there's obviously a little time before the actual... In the scene, is a little bit of time before the Blitz. It was, like I said, there was lots of black clubs in central London and so forth. So, yeah, things were happening. There was a lot of people who were mixing, a lot of people who were sort of, you know, being introduced to each other. There was a liberation within sexuality and whatnot. So, yeah, a lot of things were going on, absolutely.
I'm curious about your kind of initial ideas for the film, or when you start having the idea to do a film like this. Was it perhaps your experience in Iraq as well? Did give you some sort of knowledge about people in situation of war?
That's right. That was a starting point, because majority of people in the world, imagine how they experience war is through the media, something, and it's very abstract. Of course, it's sort of normally very graphic. It's however you receive your news on your phone or your computer, on a television, or a newspaper. It's very sort of again abstract. It's not sort of seen as something which is real as such. And I wanted to sort of my experiences in Iraq, being actually in a war zone. I wanted to bring that to a situation which was much more, obviously more familiar to people like myself, which will be at home in London, in the UK.
I want to talk about the cast, because Elliot Heffernan playing George, I mean, what a revelation. How was it the process to cast the character? Well, let's be honest, he's central to the film. I mean, it's difficult.
I mean, you write the script and all of a sudden, that's my goodness gracious. That's not so bad. Oh my God. Does George exist? Does this character, does this person exist? So we, myself and the casting director Lina Ghotmeh threw our net broad and wide to open audition. And then there was George through Elliot Heffernan, and then he was just incredible. I mean, there was a stillness to him. He was almost like a silent movie star in a way. The way he was, the way he acted, you wanted to engage with his face, his huge eyes. And again, it was just one of those, there's a magnetism to him, and that was it. And yeah, it was incredible. He's never acted before. He's not an actor.
That's crazy. And talking about George, the character, is it true that you've seen a picture of a young boy from the period? That's fascinating, because, of course, the film is based on true events, but you had to imagine a George in your head, right? Was that picture the inspiration for George?
Yes, that was the starting point in some ways, of course, after being the war artist. I wanted to make a picture about the war during that time. As soon as I saw that photograph, I thought that was my way. And basically, it was a photograph of a young black child, mixed-race child, obviously had one parent white, one parent black, standing at a railway station, waiting to be evacuated. And I thought, he was my in, seeing war through a child's eyes.
I mean, the cast of the film is superb. Of course, Saoirse Ronan, I mean, what an amazing role she played. But there's Benjamin Clementine as Ife. I mean, what a dignified character. I think he's one of my favorite characters. Fantastic. And I think because
he's a good character.
He's a good. Was he based on someone from real life?
Yeah, I mean, look, he's based on someone called Ite Epion, who was an actual air warden. But previously, before that, he was a law student. And when war broke out, he became an air warden. He signed up, and he's based on real characters. There's a speech in the film where he talks about race and how people are trying to divide us, which is actually a real speech he gave in air raid shelter. Because again, it was just one of those things where doing the research brought up so many interesting people and situations that I thought we could incorporate into our picture. But these situations, these characters had to serve the story, which is a story of Rita and George trying to reunite with his family.
Make a wish. One wish.
That was the brilliant Steve McQueen talking to Fernando, and the film Blitz is available to stream on Apple TV+. You're listening to The Briefing. Born in Beirut in the 1980s, architect Lina Ghotmeh grew up in an ancient cosmopolitan city marked by the scars of civil war. It was an experience that continues to define her work, which includes the award-winning Estonian National Museum and Stone Garden, a sculptural concrete tower in Beirut. In 2016, she established her firm, Lina Ghotmeh Architecture, in Paris, and here she discusses the founding principles of her work.
I grew up in Beirut. I was born in the 80s. Beirut during that time was finishing up actually a period of war and recovering from it. And growing up in such a city, architecture meant a lot for me. It meant a possibility of healing a landscape, a possibility of bringing people together. So growing in a city that is almost like an open section, I was drawn to that landscape that was in ruins and thinking, how can we build? What tool do I have as a human being to allow beauty to be brought back in a landscape? So basically, I was interested in architecture. I was very sensitive in drawing. I spent a lot of my time actually in childhood drawing. And at the same time, I was interested in archaeology because the city of Beirut and Lebanon has been part of a long civilization. We find traces of Phoenicians, of Ottomans, of Romans, and every time you dig in, you find again another archaeology. So it's also a field that was interesting for me. So bringing both together, somehow I came to become an architect who's very interested in traces of the past, of civilization, and of the complexity of our culture as human beings. Since my school years, I always felt like architecture is a research-driven practice. When I graduated, I worked for 2 years in big offices, but then I was always very interested in how can this specific experience that I lived in my country be transformed into a positive impact on our urban and built landscape. At that time, I found a competition for the Estonian National Museum that I joined with two colleagues of mine, and we won that project, which was building the National Museum in Tartu, and it's a 40,000 square meters project. It's an amazing opportunity, to build a building that talks about the history of that nation in Estonia that had lived also the occupation until 91. It was part of the Soviet Union. And the museum for them was a way also to get vocal on their own identity, look back into their history and talk about an architecture that is an incubator for culture and for constantly making culture. So that was the opportunity really to open my own practice, and I found myself enriching the practice from research and creating this atelier of thoughts and of looking thoroughly at the environment of every project we have. There is a sense of memory that is constantly present in our work, in the work of my atelier, and every building that emerges. There is a sense that this building had been there, but it's completely new as well. So this kind of connection that one can draw between the built space and between the human emotions and human memory. And that is born a sense of humanism as well. So I always perceive architecture as a continuity of our bodies, of ourselves as social and human beings and material beings. And in that sense, architecture, or the way it emerges from my practice, there is a sense of strength, but also a lot of humility, trying to really be just in the way we produce architecture. So it does really measure, also how much it impacts the environment, how it could be positive on the environment, both socially and architecturally, environmentally speaking. We see the sustainability not only about numbers, that the building should behave accordingly. Like, it's not about, how much consumption only a building is able to reduce on, but it's about really the durability of a building, its possibility of having a positive impact on its environment, both in terms of the use of materials, its carbon footprint, the way it produces its energy, but also in the way it's inhabited, the positive experience that it can offer to people. Like recently, one of the buildings that we delivered was the first low carbon energy positive building in France, which is dedicated for a manufacturing facility. So the idea here was how to change also the architecture, the aesthetics of industrial facilities, and bring beauty back into those facilities and allow a complete synergy with nature, with the environment, building again with bricks, And also thinking about construction and architecture as a mean of building knowledge. So while we're building, we're actually also allowing knowledge to be perpetuated, whether it's about the knowledge of brick making or the knowledge of an artisan and the knowledge of our ancestors. So this kind of compression of knowledge and know-how, architecture become like an enabler in a way. The more we move forward with our industry, the more we have to bring in and embrace complexity, because we are faced with global climate challenges, we're faced with destruction in some parts of the world, we're faced with the fast-growing economies, and we're always bringing on that complexity. And I think more and more our capacity of being able to orchestrate those complexities and allowing an architecture of positivity, and that can be a synthesis of what is our world today, would be really great. And I really hope also that will be more architecture and more places to bring people together.
That was Lina Ghotmeh. You're back with a special edition of The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm Tom Edwards. Maggi Hambling's a British artist who has, in her 50-year career, made a name for herself with her dynamic, expressionist paintings and often controversial public sculptures. Early this year, Hambling had a solo show at Pearl Lam Galleries in Hong Kong. Entitled The Night, the exhibition explored that period of time which has been an enduring subject for her and included 2 new series of paintings. She stopped by Midori House to speak to Monocle's Robert Bound. Rob began by asking Maggi about her interest in Chinese drawings.
I'm a great believer in the Chinese idea that you've got to be as eloquent where you don't make a mark as where you do make a mark. Mm-hmm. It's quite tricky. But even when I filled more of the canvas with paint than I do nowadays, I always left a bit of bare canvas for Samuel Beckett, for Waiting for Godot, always a bit. But as I got older, I try to say more with less.
Does that take a career's worth of painting and knowing what to know what to leave out, I wonder?
Yes, I think it does. To get rid of all the unnecessary bits. I mean, I get up very early in the morning and I make a drawing in my sketchbook with ink with my left hand to renew the sense of touch on the paper each morning. It's like a pianist doing the scales,
right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I do use my left hand because it's full of surprises and I don't know quite what it'll do because this hand is full of tricks after all these years, do you know? Boring.
So this kind of does what you think it's going to do a little bit more, and the left one is a law unto itself, at least at that time in the morning.
It is.
And this is at your studio in Suffolk. That must be that moment of, don't want to place a silly word in our mouths, but that moment of communion with the paper, with the canvas must be, does that feel fresh every morning?
It feels very fresh every morning. And of course, it is the best time of day because nobody telephones and the world is one's own. And for 4 or 5 years, I'd get up early in the morning and go and draw the sea. And there was no one else there. It was fantastic.
There are moments of liquidity and kineticism in this body of work, The Night, and obviously your look at the night sky itself, your works that address the night precisely, or pretty precisely. And I understand that's something that you did, some of your first works when you were a teenager, or certainly at art school, were concerned with the night, fascinated with the night.
It's even earlier than that. When I was 13 at school, and I was drawing, and the art teacher came round and said, "Why are you drawing?" Because all the other girls were painting. And I don't know what I said. Anyway, she sort of suggested that I might be colourblind, which I thought was a bit of a cheek. So I did a painting just to show her I wasn't colourblind. And then there was an art exam when I was 14. And I did nothing but flick paint at people and generally draw attention to myself because I was deeply in love with the biology mistress who was invigilating the exam. And then I saw the clock. In a bit of terror, it was 3:20, and at 3:30 I knew I had to hand in a painting, so I did one. without thinking. Mm-hmm. And then when the results came out 2 or 3 weeks later, I was top of art. So I thought, my God, this is quite interesting. I must look into this business, It seems I'm good at it and I don't even try or something. And so then I stayed up until 2 o'clock in the morning trying to paint the night sky out of my bedroom window. And I took them into school the next day and they were all laid out on these tables. And the art teacher came into the room and I was sort of standing in the corner and on the point of tears. And she came up to me and said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Well, I was up until 2 o'clock in the morning trying to paint the night sky out of my bedroom window and everyone's laughing at them." And so she said to me, "Well, it just must be water off a duck's back. Don't take a blind bit of notice of whatever anyone says about your work. You're your own best critic. And it just must be water off a duck's back." So I was very lucky to have that said to me at the age of 14.
So that's been like the words through the Hambling stick of rock, something
Yes.
like that, the family motto. And the night is obviously it's a place of madness, it's a place of romance, it's a place of carnal desire as well. These seem to be addressed in these new works that are going on display in Hong Kong. To you, is it all those things? Was it all those things from those first? You said you had a crush on or you were in love with the biology mistress. Is there a through line to this collection from those days?
For that exam, there were 3 subjects, and I chose the subject of laziness, and I painted a woman lying on a chaise longue with a half-open book. In other words, she was too lazy even to read the book. So it was the night sky came after that. But, it's a sort of universal place. Whether we're in China or whether we're in London, there is the night sky. It's a mysterious sort of realm where dream meets reality and where sex meets mythology and the unknown meets the known. And it's a strange place.
That was the great Maggi Hambling in conversation with Monocle's Robert Bound. Finally on the show, we're hearing from Almar Latour, CEO of Dow Jones and publisher of the Wall Street Journal. Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco sat down with him to find out more about the group's future plans, its efforts to secure the release of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, and how the paper manages to stay above the political polarization that's confounding many newsrooms.
I am a journalist at heart, and you never quite lose that instinct and that impulse. But I started as a news assistant for the Wall Street Journal, prior to that an intern. That was very early in my career. I was based in many different countries as a foreign correspondent, and it was in Brussels, in Stockholm, right here in London, a reporter as well in New York. I was a real scoop hound. I liked breaking stories, so I still feel that drive to get the story these days.
I always feel it's a good sign when you start as an intern, and now look at you, so...
You started as an intern.
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe that's why I was saying this as well. First of all, one question. We're definitely going to be talking about the Wall Street Journal here, but tell us about Dow Jones. What does the group encompasses? Because there are quite a few brands in this group, right?
It's a group of publications and verticals, if you will, a company that's focused on reliable information for business people to make decisions, for people in policy to make decisions, for people in their lives to make business decisions of sorts. There are different areas of focus. There's business news. That's the Wall Street Journal, prime example of that. There is wealth and investing news and information. That's Barron's and Market Watch. These are sizable publications in their own right with a devoted fan base. Then we have areas where there's news, but there's also data and analytics. Energy is one area that is incredibly important to the world and to us as a business as well, where we offer data on different commodities, where we offer analytics and forecasting. There's a business that focuses on risk. For example, as a company, how do you respond to sanctions and how do you avoid doing business with people or entities that are on a sanctions list? There's a search engine, a business search engine called Factiva that has billions of articles that knowledge workers use. But Dow Jones is about reliable information for people to make decisions in their business life and in their personal lives.
You mentioned reliable there. I mean, let's be honest, Omar, we're living in a kind of unpredictable world in the last years. Do you think people go to the source? Because I've been looking at the numbers of digital subscriptions and there's been growth among Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. Do you think that's one of the reasons people are looking for this reliability in a way?
Well, there's so much noise and there's so much misinformation. There is so much opinion, often undeclared opinion, and so there's so much confusion. I think there's a great deal of anxiety around that among readers and consumers of news and information around the world. And so, yes, when people finally find a place where they feel I can trust this information, I think that's comforting. I think it helps them in their daily lives. And yes, that translates into good business. Definitely for us, we have seen across Dow Jones a sharp increase in our business. For the Wall Street Journal itself, we have more subscriptions than ever before. We see that for Barron's, for MarketWatch as well. And so there is a premium for in your life. People put a premium on the reliability of information. That also means as a business, we can treat this as a premium product.
And I was reading one of your interviews, I mean, when you were talking about this growth as well, that you almost wanted to double down on what you guys do best, business. And of course, to be honest, I'm a fan of the brand. I love the magazine. I love the quirky articles. But is that your approach that, listen, guys, we do this well. We do business very well. So let's definitely focus our resources on that. Is that the approach you take?
Yes, you have to, in modern day publishing, you have to be aware of what your strength is, of what your focus is. And I believe in order to be successful, you do have to double down on that. Now, the way we define business, one, it's of course narrating what's happening in the actual business world, but it's also the business lens on the wider world. And the articles that you're referencing, that type of coverage, we still retain that business lens, which is a little bit detached, but finding the unique angle, very often data-driven stories that come out no matter where we focus that lens. And so that's our strength. That's where we've decided, and definitely I've pushed us to make sure that we do stay focused and that we don't dilute our presence and dilute our focus at the expense of what we're really good at and what we're known for.
And Omar, I must ask you as well about Evan Gershkovich. I mean, what a story. I remember when the whole thing happened here at Monocle as fellow journalists, we really felt for it. We covered a lot, but thankfully we had some good news. But how was it for your brand to be involved in this? Because it was a massive story globally. Yeah. It's been a massive challenge for journalism in a way.
Yes, it is a global story. And that's in part, I believe, because of the passion that people brought to the cause of Evan's release. We saw that from the Wall Street Journal newsroom at a grassroots level, people being so passionate about fighting for their colleague. We saw it from Evan's family, his mom and his dad, his sister, who pushed so hard and really put themselves out there. But we also saw it from the wider news media community. I don't recall a moment, not for decades really, where the entire industry came together and fought for one cause, in this case, the release of Evan. And that's because in addition to this freedom, of course, being incredibly important for a young man, just 32, when he was arrested for a crime that he did not commit. He's not a spy. That was so incredibly important, not just for Evan, but for the industry at large, because this is about press freedom. And press freedom around the world is under assault, first and foremost in autocratic countries like Russia. And for the news industry to make a concerted effort to fight that, I think is important. And so there was, I think, a lot of solidarity based on this could happen to anyone in journalism. We have to be loud about it. So from the start, I personally said, and our editor-in-chief, Emmett Tucker, also pushed hard to be loud about this, to not quietly let this happen, and put a spotlight on it. And as a result, I think press freedom has gotten a lot of attention that maybe otherwise it wouldn't have gotten quite to this degree. Evan is out. That was the most important thing. It was an amazing moment, and it was a difficult year and a half for him and for his family, and I think for everyone who knows Evan. But also, as a company, it was a difficult journey with a rare good ending.
Almar Latour there, CEO of Dow Jones and publisher of the Wall Street Journal. And that brings us to the end of this special edition of The Briefing, which was produced by Jack Dewars. We'll have more highlights from other great interviews that aired on Monocle Radio this year coming up on a New Year's Day edition of this programme next week. The Briefing is back at the same time tomorrow. I'm Tom Edwards, goodbye and thanks for listening.